Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Everybody Has a Story with Jeff Seltzer podcast. I am your host, Jeff Seltzer. Every week, I interview someone about their interests, life stories, or whatever they've experienced. I'm trying to learn more about people as much as I can, help them share their stories, and learn along the way as well, and maybe share a few of my own stories as well. If you're new to the pod, thank you for giving it a shot, checking it out. I think you'll have a lot of fun in this journey with me. I am blown away by the response I've gotten so far and absolutely loved all the reviews and all the feedback I've gotten. Wanted to share one review that I just got a couple of days ago, which was super exciting to see. And again, absolutely love to see it. So happy to see it. So thank you again. User named Ed2277 said he joined the learning mission. Super entertaining and informative. I knew very little about celebrity autographs, and now I know more, and I was tricked into learning via entertainment. Kudos, Jeff. So Ed2277, thank you so much for sharing that. Love to see it. Definitely reach out if you want. Find us on Instagram at Everybody Has a Story Pod. Send me a DM. Love to send you a couple of stickers as a thanks for sending a review like that. Have a couple of guests this week. Before I introduce them, though, I wanted to get through some housekeeping. So initially, we launched on YouTube and Spotify and Apple. Now, after a couple of weeks, we've gone across the board. So as we would say in the business, distribution has picked up. We are currently on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, iHeartRadio, Amazon, Castbox, and Good Pods, whatever that is. So if you listen on Good Pods, thanks for joining. Happy you're able to hear and see me at this point. Additionally, along with video on YouTube, we also have video on Spotify. So however you want to consume your podcast, there we are. Additionally, as mentioned before, on Instagram, we can be found at Everybody Has a Story Pod. YouTube, same thing, at Everybody's a Story Pod. My personal Insta is at Seltzer77. If you want to email us directly, if you want to sponsor, if you just want to kind of give a shout out, you can feel free to email us at everybodyhasastorypod@gmail.com. And obviously for everything or all things Jeff Seltzer, you can check me out at jeffseltzer.com. Has all these links saved there. Additionally, lots of really cool moments from my life, lots of funny stories, and lots of randomness, whatever else like that. My DMs are open. So again, if you want to be a guest at some point or have some feedback, please don't hesitate to share. With that said, this week I do have two guests, which I'm really, really excited about. Like, this is one where when I started the podcast, I was trying to figure out like how I can make this work, how I can talk to these two guys and kind of recap and rehash something that we did back in April, which was a lot of fun. So just to kind of give you a little background here. So for those of you that aren't aware, Wrestlemania is the largest wrestling event in America that takes place annually. Wrestlemania is run by WWE, World Wrestling Entertainment. For those of you that aren't aware, that was WWF years and years ago. Over the years, it's kind of evolved. Years ago, back in 1985, it started in Madison Square Garden. It was one night. Eventually, it evolved. Now it's two nights. So it's Saturday and Sunday night. So between two nights, you're getting like 14, 15 shows. It's huge. Nowadays, they do it in like a huge football stadium. And they can draw anywhere from 60 to 100,000 fans per show. Which is huge, right? You're bringing in a lot of people from all over the world. So I think they always advertise like 100 countries or 200 countries people came in for. So you've got a lot of people that are new to a market for a couple of days or a short time period. Similar to when a big act comes to town like Taylor Swift or the Super Bowl or the Olympics, millions of dollars are spent in that area. So from a hotel, commerce, restaurants, and stuff like that. So similar to the Super Bowl and to the Olympics, towns and cities actually do bid on trying to get a big event like Wrestlemania. An example of this is recently they announced that Indianapolis, Indiana, the place where the Indianapolis Colts play football, they recently won a bid to host an upcoming Wrestlemania, Royal Rumble, and SummerSlam. So that's basically 3 separate years. They're going to bring, as many as 100,000 people into town, lots of information, lots of money, lots of all that kind of stuff, lots of interests that are happening there. So as you would assume, with that many people in town, a lot of other companies see what they can do to kind of make the most of it. So over the last few years, lots of smaller independent wrestling shows or wrestling companies have opened up house in the WrestleMania town. An example, this year, WrestleMania was in Philadelphia, Saturday and Sunday night in early April. So many different companies had shows throughout the week. So let's see. High Spots, great provider of wrestling materials, wrestling shows, stuff like that. They open up something called WrestleCon, which is similar to Comic-Con, where you can go, you can meet wrestlers, you can see some wrestling shows, stuff like that. Game Changer Wrestling, huge fan of it, been into it for a couple of years now. They had something called The Collective, where they had, I think it was like 9 or so shows over the course of like 3 or 4 days. Amazing stuff. They do lots of different types of wrestling, but like they obviously exploit the fact that people are in town. They look for people to spend money, buy tickets. We went to it, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Additionally, just wanted to mention that with all of that said, my two guests I'm about to introduce and I spent 6 days in Philadelphia in early April, and we went to a total of 13 shows, which is incredible. Definitely one of the favorite weeks of my life, and two guys that I loved hanging out with, which was an amazing time. So with that said, I want to introduce my two guests. I'm going to add them to the podcast now. So I'd like to welcome Steve Fatt and Daniel Ireland. Boys, how's it going?
Hey, doing well. Man. Thanks for
having
us, Jeff.
Thank you. Well, first of all, guys, thanks for joining me. It's been, about 3 or 4 months now since we all hung out in Philly. So obviously wanted to use this as an opportunity to both educate, the non-wrestling fans out there of what WrestleMania week looks like, talk about some of the shenanigans that we got into kind of the week that we had, and just kind of talk through how, some people who don't know about it, it could be interesting to them, but maybe it's not. We'll see. So anyhow, with that said, Steve, I did meet you first years and years ago. So do you want to give a little background on yourself and maybe talk about how this came together from your side?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm Steve. I am 38, originally from Waterbury, Connecticut, now residing down south in Virginia Beach. I feel like I'm giving my whole background here to all your listeners. But I've been a long-time wrestling fan. I kind of got into it really early with Hulk Hogan, and then I want to say DX and Austin really carried me through my teen years. And then independent wrestling like Ring of Honor, that really carried me through my adult years. In fact, that's where I actually met Jeff at an independent show in New Jersey. What was it? Pro Wrestling Syndicate, I believe?
Yep, back in 2014, I think it was. Yeah.
Yeah, so they put on a really big show, and I noticed it because down south, we don't really get a lot of big shows. So if you want to go see something, you got to travel. So I had went up to New Jersey that weekend. I'm a front row person just like Jeff, so I sat down. I didn't know anybody, and to my right, what'd you know? There's Jeff Seltzer. We struck up a conversation. Been longtime buds ever since.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Steve. Daniel, how about yourself? Can you briefly talk about how we first met and kind of like where we are today?
Yeah, sure can. Thanks again for having us, Jeff. And good to see you again, Steve. So I'm originally actually from Scotland, so massive wrestling fan in the UK. When I eventually moved here just over 6 years ago to the US, was kind of on my island on my own, not really any friends that I knew that liked wrestling. So I was kind of secretly going to shows, watching wrestling myself, didn't really lose the love for it. And then one day, Jeff and I actually worked together. And we seen a random newsletter that our company puts out that talks about stories about ourselves. And Jeff just happened to do one about his love for wrestling. So I was like, fantastic. So straight away, sent him a little message and just like, would love to chat sometime. Fellow wrestling fan here. And then, spent some time chatting, realized we both had a love for wrestling and kind of reignited our love for independent wrestling, especially for me. I'd be more of a WWE, sort of WCW guy. But actually really coming and start spending some time with Jeff. Jeff has such a knowledge on independent wrestling that really reignited my love for that. And then I got a chance to meet Steve when we went to Hammerstein. So we went to the GCW show at Hammerstein, which is incredible. And I got a chance to meet Steve there. And then obviously we had a great time a few months back now, going back and having a look at that show again.
Awesome. Thanks, Daniel. Thank you for sharing. It's obviously I met Steve and Daniel in two very different ways. I met Steve at a wrestling show years ago. Daniel I met at work. Corporate America is a weird place. Sometimes you put yourself out there, you can kind of get ridiculed or torn apart. But for me, I'm in my mid to late 40s at this point, and I have a little bit less concern about kind of, I guess, reputation, more about just trying to kind of be my authentic self. So by putting out in the newsletter about how years earlier I had worked with John Cena and whenever proposed Serial, and again, as Daniel said, my love for wrestling, sometimes it pays off. And in this case, Daniel's one of my best friends, and it just paid off well. So since then, we've gone to many wrestling shows together, lots of great experiences. So, there's a lesson there, great. If not, I don't know. So with that said, that comes down to how did this all come together? So as mentioned earlier, WrestleMania was in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in early April 2024. Generally for WrestleMania, they announce anywhere between like a year to 3 years out where it's going to be. And it had been a while since I got into WrestleMania. So this was my 6th WrestleMania. I went to WrestleMania 15 in Philadelphia, 17 in Houston, WrestleMania 20 in Madison Square Garden, 29 in MetLife Stadium, and then WrestleMania 30, which was in New Orleans. So at this point, it had been about 10 years since I'd last gone to WrestleMania. And while WrestleMania seems cool, I was super excited because over the last couple of years, I've watched a lot more Game Changer Wrestling, so GCW. And I know every year during WrestleMania week, they put on something called The Collective, where they put on a hugely diverse set of wrestling shows over the course of the week. So they'll put on a Japanese wrestling show, an all-women's wrestling show, a hardcore wrestling show, They do one that's called Effie's Big Gay Brunch, which is a very it's just a fabulous festival of wrestling, various lifestyles. So for me, I was like, this is what I want to go to. WrestleMania would be cool, but going to the Collective, which is this list of lots of smaller shows, is really where I wanted to be. So as soon as they announced it was going to be in Philadelphia, I quickly posted on Facebook. I was like, hey friends, anybody who wants to go, this is what I'm doing. You're welcome to join me, or you're welcome to not join me, but this is what's happening. Almost immediately, Steve and Daniel both responded to me. Were like, yes, let's do this. I want to go. I was like, great, just to let you guys know, it's going to be an intense and aggressive week. It could be a little pricey, but let's have some fun. And without a doubt, they were like, let's just do it. And I was like, okay, here's the way I see it. I kind of laid out an agenda of where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do. And they're like, yep, just take care of it. We'll get it done. So as soon as that happened, the challenge for me is I'm a long-term planner. And when they add something like this, they say, okay, this is going to happen, but you can't buy tickets till like months and months and months later. So for me, I'm looking at it and saying, great, I need to do something to kind of like lock it in. Not that I have PTSD, but I was like, are Daniel and Steve are they going to commit? They said yes, but are they going to go? What's going to happen? And generally in situations like this, there's not a real commitment until you've booked something. Like once they have, money in place, something at stake, then at that point you feel safe and you're like, okay, great, this is going to happen. So as soon as I found out about this, I was like, okay, Steve and Daniel and I are going to go. And I found what I thought would be the best hotel to go based on where the Collective was going to be and Mania was going to be. Downtown Philly, everything's within a few miles, so it makes total sense. So found the Hilton Hotel, which was fantastic. It was about, I'd say, a mile or so from where most of the wrestling events were, and I thought this would be great. Challenge was that in a lot of these hotels, you can't find a room that has 3 beds. As much as I love to share a bed with Daniel and Steve, we're 3 grown men, and it gets a little weird, I guess. So I booked the hotel, and as soon as I booked the hotel, I called up and I was like, hey, is there a way to get a rollaway bed or some way to get a 3rd bed in this room? They said, absolutely not a problem. We're going to note it on your account. We're going to put a 3rd bed in there. That will not be an issue, Mr. Seltzer. I told Steve and Daniel, they're like, that's great. It's a done deal. No worries, right? About 2 months later, I called again, and I was like, hey, guys, just to confirm, you have on our account there's going to be a 3rd bed. They're like, yeah, it says on your account. It's not a problem. Don't worry about it. I probably made this call about 6 times over the course of a year to the Hilton to make sure, right? Daniel and Steve thought that I was just going insane. They're like, no, you called. It says it there. This is not an issue. Why would you even ask such a question? I was like, look, I know how the universe works sometimes. And I was like, you know what? This could be an issue. I just want to make sure that something doesn't get deleted, something, whatever else like that. Fine. Okay, so fast forward to April of 2024, we get to the hotel. Steve's already there because he flew in earlier in the day. Daniel and I are driving in, and I keep saying to Daniel, I'm like, there's going to be an issue. He's like, no, mate, it's not going to be an issue. And Daniel says, mate, this is why I said that. It's going to be fine. We're going to have 1 room, 3 beds. It's all going to be good. So we get there. Steve and Daniel, they start getting reacquainted. I go to the front desk, and I'm at the front desk for, what would you guys say, about like 30, 35 minutes? Like, it feels like it's going on forever, right? So they bring the suitcases in. I'm at the front desk. While they're just kind of talking and hanging out, maybe having a drink, I'm like, okay, so, hey, I'd like to check in. My name's Jeff Seltzer. Here's my information, blah, 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 blah. And they're like, okay, you have 1 room with 2 queen beds. I'm like, okay. And per my account, it says that I should have a rollaway bed because we're 3 grown men that don't want to share a bed. And they're like, no, you can't have a rollaway bed. It's impossible, obviously. And I'm like, wait, what do you mean, obviously? I called literally 6 times over the last year. And they're like, no, it's a fire hazard. We cannot put a rollaway bed in that room. I'm like, you don't seem to understand. Like, we booked this hotel specifically because we were told we could have 3 beds in it. Wouldn't be an issue. And like, I can only imagine, and Daniel, Steve, I'd love to hear your feedback on this, just kind of like how it looked from afar. Like, you're probably looking at it saying like, A, this should be very turnkey. And B, the look on Jeff's face says something isn't as it should be. Like, what were your thoughts at this point?
I would say that the highlight of this part was that Steve and I got to get reacquainted with a drink. So the first 10 minutes, we didn't even really notice you weren't back. Then we did think that because of your status with Hilton, that you might have been trying to get us an upgrade to penthouse or something. That was a discussion point. But then we seen you from afar starting to pace, and we realized that it wasn't quite right. And I don't think you mentioned, but you actually started texting us as well from 100 yards away, telling us there were some issues. So it was an entertaining, I would say, from afar. So I don't know what you think, Steve.
At first, man, I thought we didn't have the room. I was like, oh no, are we screwed right here? What's going on? But me and Dan, we're joking, like, he's pretending to be Jeff. I'm pretending to be the hotel worker. We're having like a mock conversation. Like, so you're in town for wrestling? Yes, just like everybody else. Blah, blah, blah. And we're just going about our business, having a grand old time. And next thing you know, we're getting text updates from Jeff, bad news, dot, dot, dot. What the hell's going on? They don't have a spare bed. And we're like, okay, well, he's probably on it. It's a busy day. It's a busy weekend. He's got it covered. And then you see Jeff starting to do the pacing. And we're like, oh, damn, what's going on, man?
Yeah, I mean, I would say at the time, and I'll get to the conclusion of the story in a second, but at the time, I was in panic mode, right? Like I was sitting there, and the only other time I can compare it to, and I'll tell this on a future pod, is me trying to buy merchandise at a wrestling show in Japan about 3 weeks ago. Like that's the only point of comparison. I'm trying to buy something and nobody speaks English, and I have a sheet of paper that's all in Japanese. Again, I'll tell that in a future story, but it's a similar comparison. Anyway, so the person I'm talking to was like, yeah, this isn't going to happen. I was like, okay. For me, I'm a very solution-oriented and solution-driven person. So I'm like, okay, so what are our options here? She's like, well, the three of you could share a room. I'm like, okay, well, that's not going to happen. What else can we do? She goes, well, you could buy a second room. And I'm like, okay, well, we didn't necessarily, let's say, budget for a second room. Staying in a hotel room for 5 nights was fairly pricey. So doubling that up would obviously, increase the amount of money we had to spend. So after going back and forth, and I realized this was going nowhere. And again, I'm a very cordial person. Like even if something's getting fired up, like I'm not going to start yelling. I'm not going to start name calling because I recognize this is going to go nowhere fast, right? Like the worse that I make it, I'm more of a de-escalator. If I try to escalate it up, it's just going to get bad and ugly. And at the end of the day, we're going to be sleeping on the street for a week. And that's good for nobody. So I was like, hey, so, I understand. And it seems like we've kind of hit a wall. Is there someone else I could talk to? So she calls over a manager who comes over like 10 minutes later. And the manager is like, okay, so what's up? And I explained the story. And she's like, yeah, obviously we can't put a rollaway bed in there. I'm like, how come everybody except for I know this? This doesn't make any sense to me. Like I've talked to everybody. And I guess none of you were on the phone when I called. So long story short, too late, I know. She's like, well, what do you want? I was like, well, what I would like is either a rollaway bed in our room, which isn't going to happen, or I want you to comp me a second room. She goes, okay. I go, what do you mean, okay? She goes, we'll just give you a second room for free. I'm like, that sounds great. She's like, then she pulls away her employee and points me to another guy who was working behind the counter. So she goes, so talk to him. I'm like, okay. So he's like, oh, so I see they've dumped you off on me. I'm like, well, that's a great way to start a conversation. Thanks, buddy. And he's like, so what's going on? I was like, well, long story short, here's my reservation. And they said that you're going to cop a second room. He's like, she said a free room for 5 nights. I was like, yeah. He goes, okay, that sounds great. Like he didn't even hear the conversation or hear her say that. But I basically just said that. And he's like, okay. So 2 minutes later, he goes into the system. He's typing his stuff up, whatever. He goes, okay, you've got room number X and Y. Have a great day. And I'm like, perfect. And for the entire trip, I was waiting for a bill that was like double what was expected at the end. But that bill never came. Like we legitimately paid for the one room. The second room was truly comped. And that was that. So it's one of those stories where, like, for me, I do think that there was definitely some way of, by not escalating it, not yelling and screaming, it definitely helped us get our case. But we also got a second room, which was great. So we spread it out. The 2 rooms were next to each other, which was awesome as well. It worked out well, especially as we had slightly different agendas at different points during the week. So people were coming and going. It was great. We had a second fridge so we could put drinks in there. So it worked out well. So for me, again, like it was definitely a stressful moment, especially, if I was there by myself, granted I wouldn't need 2 rooms, but I probably would have been like, okay, I'll switch hotels. It's not a big deal. But knowing that like there were 2 guys there waiting that were counting on me to do something there, like for me, that was what it was. It was kind of, I'm a natural people pleaser. So the fact that I was like, okay, maybe the 3 of us are going to have to spoon in one bed, just that didn't really come across as something I was looking to do. And I didn't want to have to go over explain to them, like, look, even though I called 6 times and they always reassured me it's not happening. So by the way, we're all sharing a twin bed. So, it worked out well. I'd say it was best case scenario. And that's where we ended up. So super happy with that.
I'm sorry, you really lucked out because think about how many people fly into town or come into town for this event, right? You got to figure every hotel, at least a nice hotel in that radius, is going to be booked up. For them to have 1 extra spare room right next to the room we already had,
yes,
like that's luck right there.
Yeah, no, that definitely worked out to be best case scenario. And it's one of those things where, whoever you believe in or whatever you believe in, like maybe the universe was like smiling at me. I don't know. But I also kind of believe in karma and the fact that if you're a good person and treat others well, things will happen as they should, let's say. So whatever it was, whatever good deeds I put in, if I cashed in some, get out of jail free cards or something, it worked out well for us that week. So I was super happy with the way it turned out. One thing I'll add too is if anybody does go to a Hilton a bunch of times during a year, the Hilton American Express, and this is not sponsored, this is just more from my experience, the Hilton American Express almost paid for itself that week. So I think it's a few $100 per year, but like we got, I want to say like 2 free breakfasts every day. In other hotels, I would have gotten the executive lounge. Like there were definitely some perks that I got. You get status. Maybe that's what helped also in terms of getting the second room was the fact they saw that I had platinum status from the credit card. I don't know. But whatever it was, whatever the circumstances were, it worked out. So, the Hilton gods definitely, smiled at me that day. So that was that.
I'm not going to lie. I thought you were about to announce your first sponsor there for a second.
No, I'm hopeful. I mean, anybody who wants to sponsor me, I'll take it. Right now I'm in the red. I mean, just to be perfectly clear, this is definitely a self-funded podcast. It is what it is. Maybe one day, but at the end of the day, this is a passion project. This is something that I like to do for fun. Reconnecting. I mean, in the absence of this podcast, would the three of us be talking right now and, reminiscing about our trip? Maybe, maybe not. But if nothing else, I'm learning a lot. I'm sharing a lot. It's just a fun experience. But, with that said, I am a capitalist. I do live in America and I like money. So if anybody wants to sponsor for anything, I will wear t-shirts, hats. I'll put a poster in the background. Whatever you want, I'm here for it. So email me at everybodyhasastorypod@gmail.com or, DM me at everybodyhasastorypod at Instagram. Cool. So with that said, so we did check into the hotel. They're kind of fast forwarding a little bit throughout the week. As I said, we did 13 different shows, right? Daniel and I did WrestleMania. We did a whole lot of the Collective. We did the Independent Hall of Fame. We did a whole bunch of different stuff. Steve did a show over at the ECW Arena, the High Spots show that they did there. So before going into some of the details, I have notes here. Steve, can you tell me like kind of some of your highlights? Like what would you say, if you could do it again, like what's the one show that you enjoyed the most, and kind of give us a little detail in terms of why?
Jeez, I want to say Joey Janela's Spring Break. That was my WrestleMania of the week because I did not get to go to WrestleMania. I had plans worked out with another friend, and those fell through, and I'm perfectly fine with that because I got to spend more money at the independent shows and at merch and autograph signings and food and whatever have you. So I'm cool with that. Plus, that weekend, it was pretty cold for WrestleMania, so I'm good missing it. Don't worry. But no, I want to say Joey Janela's Spring Break. They had a match with Mance Warner versus Effie, which was like a blood feud. And it was an I Quit match. And I had been following these guys for a while. So getting to see them actually have this blow-off match, that was my WrestleMania moment.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And to that point too, Steve, I think you ended up with a really awesome souvenir from that show as well. Do you want to talk about that?
I did, yeah. Let me actually pull that up in a second. So I got a piece of the table, the door that these guys went through. And I was able to walk over to them after the show and get them to sign it.
Yeah, that looks really cool.
Yeah, I still got to shadow box this thing and hang it up. But got Mance and Effie to sign it. And nice little collectible from that match and from the show.
Nice. And just to add to what Steve said as well, where he just kind of nonchalantly met the wrestlers after the show, something that a lot of people don't necessarily realize is if you go to a WWE show like WrestleMania or Monday Night Raw or just like a weekend show, whatever, the wrestlers for the most part are inaccessible, right? You buy your ticket to the show, you watch the show, and you go home. One thing that for me separates the experience at a smaller show or an independent show versus, let's say, a WWE or an AEW wrestling show is it's a lot more intimate. So a lot of these wrestlers make a lot of their money off of meet and greets before or after the show. So very often at these shows, you can meet the wrestler, get a picture with them, get a signed whatever, before or after the show, you pay for it. But you get a really great experience. So if my favorite wrestler is, insert name here, very often before or after a GCW show or various independent shows, I can meet that wrestler, which for me kind of adds to the experience. So again, all things being equal from a cost perspective, you go to a WWE show, you pay for your ticket, you could be sitting in anywhere between like a 10,000 to 100,000 seat arena, right? So you're not really that close. GCW, so for the Collective guys, we sat first row for every single show that weekend, right? So we were right there. I'll show some pictures in a little while, but yeah, legitimately, you're sitting first row, you're high-fiving the wrestlers as they walk by. Like, you can see everything. So between that and the fact that, again, like, you can go then meet your favorite wrestlers before or after the show, like, for me, I just love it. Like, it adds to the experience. And, how often do you get to watch a TV show or a movie and then meet Chris Evans, Captain America afterwards, or whatever it is that you're watching? Here, Danhausen, one of my favorite wrestlers, you can see him wrestle and you get a picture with him after the show, like stuff like that. It's just an awesome experience that then you have pictures, whatever. If you collect action figures, which is one of my newer things, is collecting action figures and getting them signed by the wrestler of the action figure. this is the way to do it, right? And it's not that expensive, right? If you want a Tom Brady autographed action figure, first of all, meeting Tom Brady is near impossible. If you meet Tom Brady, it's going to cost you $4,000 to get it autographed, right?
Wow.
Versus, let's say, Mustafa Ali, right? He used to be in WWE. He's now in TNA Wrestling. You could buy his action figure for $20 or $30, and then at a wrestling convention or at a small independent show, you can get an autograph for like $30. So all in for like $60, you've got his autographed action figure that you could put up on the wall. Any wrestler you could think of in smaller shows, that's the way that it is. It's a fantastic experience, and again, it makes for great stories, and you go home much happier. At least I do, anyway. Daniel, can you talk through maybe what your favorite show or shows or experience may have been throughout the week?
Yeah, I'm going to do two just because you said one, but I'm
course.
going to do two. So, on a serious note, DDT Pro was by far my favorite show. It's a Japanese independent wrestling promotion that we don't really get to see a lot of in the US. So you'll see a lot of their wrestlers that'll come over and maybe do indie shows, but to actually get to see a card from top to bottom with those wrestlers we don't normally see was just incredible. Ton of high flying action, lots of really great stars that you hear about and you see bits on YouTube or you hear on podcasts. To actually get a chance to see them front row and just see how incredible they were, for me that was an awesome experience. Really, just seeing that show. An honorable mention for me though, and one that probably doesn't sell this to the casual independent wrestling fan, was the first show we went to. So after Jeff had got us into the hotel, this day it's pretty miserable weather. It was mid-60s, ton of rain. It was like me being back in Scotland, really. And we went to a show, Wrestle John, at Attic Brewing. And it's just what you imagine. It was a brewery with a car park where they had a tent in the pouring rain. But we got to see some fantastic wrestling there. Paul London versus Mike Bailey, my MVP of the whole event. We'll get to him probably later on. But just the chance to think that we started a week where we went to so many great shows. We went to 2 nights at Wrestlemania. We started it in a brewery car park in the rain. So I don't know if you guys have any thoughts and memories of that show, but that one will always kind of live with me, I think.
Yeah, Daniel, just to add to that. So for me, I mean, and probably Steve as well, historically, most independent or smaller wrestling shows, like there were seats. Specifically in New Jersey, there's usually barricades. So for the most part, you're 5-6 feet away from the ring. For me, this was the first time I ever went to a wrestling show that A, had no seats, and B, had no barricade. So legitimately, the entire show, we were leaning on the ring, right? So you had 2 guys wrestling inside of a tent that was kind of flooding. There was water coming in from the outside, and we were leaning on the ring. So as wrestlers went outside the ring, like they were just in a mob of people. For me, it was insane. Like it was fun. Plus, there were a couple of wrestlers that we recognized, like to your point, Mike Bailey was wrestling Paul London, 2 of my favorites. Jimmy Lloyd, who's a name in GCW wrestling, which is cool to see them up front. And to your point, I think it was a great way to start the week. It was a super inexpensive show inside of a bar. I think afterwards we got food next door. It was just an awesome time, to your point, in terms of starting the week, in terms of how to see wrestling shows and kind of like experience it. Steve?
It's the only time I've ever had to stand in an actual puddle while pounding the mat to show my support for a wrestler. And then when these guys would come outside, they're realizing that they're stepping in puddles too. Freaking Mike Bailey, who's barefoot, you see when he comes around, he walks around, he's like, oh, crap, I'm walking in puddles over here. But yeah, it was like round after round of beers. I remember that. And we finished off the night with some barbecue, and we were really, or at least I was, harassing the guy doing karaoke, asking him to play random songs that he would not want to play.
Cool. Well, thank you for sharing, Steve. So, Daniel, do you have another story you want to tell, or another show, or do you want me to?
I could go on for hours, but let's go. Let's move on.
Okay, cool. So, I would say for me, I agree with you, Daniel. Like, so I'd say my 2 favorite shows for the week, or my favorite show was definitely the DDT Pro show as well. So knowing that I was going to go to Japan in June, July of this year, I was super excited to kind of see it. And for me, it blew me away, right? Like the level of, first of all, just like the toughness they have. There's a lot of comedy wrestling also. Like there's one match that like I could probably watch a dozen times and never get tired of. And it just shows the level of quality of how good these wrestlers are. So sometimes it's tongue-in-cheek. Obviously, wrestling is what it is, right? We understand wrestling is a show of what it is. There is one wrestler who's legitimately a mannequin, right? So it's not even like a person inside of the puppet of the mannequin. Like it's legitimately a mannequin. So oftentimes there's a joke like, so-and-so is such a good wrestler, they can have a great match with like, a broom or a mop or whatever else like that. Like that's pretty close to what this is. And so I don't remember who the wrestler was that fought it, but there was a wrestler going up against a mannequin the entire match. And it was fantastic. Like watching it, like again, knowing it's a mannequin, you're still looking at it and saying like, how is he doing these moves? Because obviously he's doing it on his own, right? The mannequin is not working with him, whatever else like that. But just watching it happen just blew me away. And like, I was crying. I was laughing so hard the entire show. Like, I absolutely loved it. Other matches as well. Additionally, it was a great opportunity to meet a lot of Japanese wrestlers who don't wrestle in the States that often. So afterwards, we met a bunch of them. Takashita, who's a name in AEW, wrestled on the show as well. So that was pretty cool. The other show I would say that I really absolutely loved, and we've got a couple of really good stories from it too, is a show called Bloodsport. So not sure if you guys know, not you guys I'm talking to, but anybody who's listening. But obviously wrestling is wrestling and everyone kind of knows what it is and it looks a certain way. But what they do in GCW sometimes is they have a show called Bloodsport, which kind of blurs the lines a little bit more. I mean, we still know kind of what it is. Like, it is, predetermined and whatever else like that. But it looks, let's say, a lot more real. So Bloodsport is almost like a mixed martial arts or a UFC version of wrestling. What they'll do is they take all the ropes off of the ring. And so you have the ring up with the 4 turnbuckles or the 4 posts. But it's 2 people get into the ring and fight it as if it were like, a no-holds-barred UFC match. Which for me was just insane and amazing. Like, I had seen it a bunch of times and I was like, I absolutely want to see this. For me, one of the draws also was the main event of the show, or one of the main events of the show, was Shayna Baszler from WWE against Masha Slamovich, who's in TNA wrestling. For me, it completely blew me away, and I loved it, right? Like, the entire time you're watching it and knowing to yourself, like, this is, let's say, a work as they refer to it in wrestling. But still, like, the kicks and the level of brutality was just ridiculous. Like, watching it, it was insane. Daniel, do you want to, Steve, yes. Do you want to go talk to it?
No, I was going to say real quick, I remember the atmosphere being incredible for that main event. It was legit split 50-50 because a lot of independent shows, you don't get a major WWE name. For them to send Shayna Baszler, who may not be the biggest star, but in that building, she was the biggest star, aside from CM Punk. But you know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, to see a WWE contracted wrestler against a TNA or GCW contracted talent in this Bloodsport event, the whole building, the atmosphere was insane.
Yeah, especially given Shayna's background. Shayna was mixed martial arts before, so to kind of have her, we know it's still wrestling, but to have her almost legitimacy bringing it into this format, to have a ex-MMA/WWE crossover in that space was just incredible. But even some of the other wrestlers are great, like see Nick Nemeth, who's just recently won the TNA title now. He was there, and just some other fantastic wrestlers in Bloodsport was an awesome show.
Absolutely. And to that point, let me just show one picture that, like, for me, kind of like, it blew me away, right? So this is a independent show, so it's not a WWE show. There was a WWE wrestler there, but like, for me, what kind of said it all was, here's a picture that I took at the show. And if you look at the picture, CM Punk was there, right? So CM Punk, big name sitting there. If you look close enough, you can see other wrestlers. Nia Jax is there. Lots of other WWE wrestlers were there, and they went across town, hung out, and watched this small independent show, which for me, the fact that they did this and showed so much support for one of their own was huge, but also it kind of added another level of like awesomeness to an independent show. Like, hey, CM Punk is the same show that I am, just watching it with me. It was really, really cool. With that, Daniel, do you want to introduce another, let's say, pseudo celebrity that was at the show that we interacted with?
Yeah. So as Jeff knows, we were lucky. We were front row. So we were sitting there, and we were the 3 seats on the end. There was no one to the left of us, so we were kind of spread out across these 4 seats. And then the next thing I get, someone comes up and just touches me on the shoulder and goes, "Are you okay if I sit here?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, of course you can." Turning around to see it is CJ Perry or Lana, who was a WWE superstar. Now is in EAW. I think she's just left now, but basically a bona fide wrestling star decided to sit next to us so she could film and shout encouragement for her friend Shayna. I think we then spent the whole of the match, the next 15 minutes, as she was asking us what chants we should do. We were starting chants together. She was asking who's going to win. She was starting chants for a friend. It was just an unbelievable experience to think you're sitting beside someone who's performed at WrestleManias, who's been around the world as a professional wrestler, as an independent show, but super engaged, but just super passionate about her friend as well. It was probably up there in the 2 or 3 highlights for me. I don't know what you guys think, but it was one of the highlights probably of my wrestling journey, not even just that show. So
yeah, super random. Yeah,
it was really cool. I mean, and as Daniel had said, like, we legitimately like had, let's say, a moment with CJ Perry. Like, this is someone who for years we've watched him on the Night Raw and SmackDown. He said at WrestleMania and AEW and stuff like that. So the fact that like we're sitting there, or standing there, and all of a sudden, a woman goes up to Daniel and goes, "Hey, you mind if I stand here?" We're like, "Absolutely." And we're like, "Oh shoot, look who this is." And we're talking, whatever else like that, and like having like not just small talk, but having like legit conversations about, wow, look what Shane is doing, what's the crowd saying. As Daniel said, starting chants, stuff like that. Like for me, this was amazing. I mean, for me personally, this was like, and I'll tell a story probably in a future podcast, but similar to, not really. When I sat next to Dominic Mysterio when he was 8 years old at a Madison Square Garden WWE house show, which, in hindsight is ridiculous, but it did happen. But like, it's not every day you're sitting next to like a celebrity or a name at a show like this. And, again, she seemed just as excited as we were about the show. And like, I think Daniel looking at me was kind of like, does she know who's going to win? Like, does she know what's going to happen? And like, I don't think either of us really had a sense of if she was, playing us or working us, or if she was just, a fan. Like, it seemed like she was legitimately just like happy for her friend, trying to, enjoy it. And she was recording Instagram videos, taking pictures, stuff like that, which again, I love to see, friends supporting friends in that business. It was really, really cool.
And she never charged us for this awesome picture as well. So we've got to remember.
She did not. Yeah, on a side note, and which we'll get into that in a second. So WrestleCon took place the exact same week as well in Philly, which we went to for a couple of days. And CJ Perry did have a table at WrestleCon, and I think she was charging $50 for a picture. So we took this picture, and she didn't say, "Okay, here's a Venmo request for $50." Legitimately, it was really cool. Like I would say, on top of that, there were a number of other wrestlers that we ran into in some of these independent shows that were also at WrestleCon. I got a picture with Ricky Starks, current AEW superstar. I think he was charging $40 at WrestleCon if he was there. Didn't pay for it. A few others as well. Nick Wayne.
All right, you brought up his name. I got to go to the story. So
go for it.
When it comes to Ricky Starks, all right. So I go to the bathroom at spring break, and I'm coming out of the bathroom, and once Ricky Starks is right there. And I'm like, "Hey, Ricky, let me get a quick photo." Great guy, gets the photo with him. I come back to the seat. I tap you guys on the shoulder like, "Hey, look who I just met, Ricky Starks." Jeff sees the photo on my phone. He gets up and he beelines immediately to
100%.
the hallway.
I would do it again.
To try to find Ricky Starks.
Yes.
I'm looking over at Dan. I was like, "You see this?" He goes, "Yeah, man." Jeff ended up missing that whole next match because he was going around the building trying to find Ricky Starks wherever he was.
No doubt, and I would do it again. And for reference, for those of you who are watching the video, which hopefully some of you guys are, here's the picture. Again, this picture, and plus there's some photo armor in the background. I'm sure she's notable or not, who knows. But again, this is one where I was running around. It probably took me 10, 15 minutes to find him. But once I did, and obviously trying to find the right moment to say, "Hey, Ricky, I'm a huge fan. Can I take a quick picture?" He's like, "Absolutely." Took the picture. He seems happy. He had a great shot up my nose too, which is good too. I got to work on my selfies. But yeah, it was the same thing, whatever. I got a couple others like that with, like I said, with Nick Wayne, with Blake Christian. It was just a fun time, right? Like at a WWE show, you're not going to randomly run into other wrestlers and say, "Hey, can I get a picture?" So with these types of shows, you never know who you're going to see, who you're going to run into, whatever else like that. So for me, that's also part of the excitement. Like I personally collect pictures with wrestlers. I have probably over 700 of them over the last 25 plus years. So for me, like this is part of the enjoyment, like, another souvenir that, I get to take home, I can share out, I can keep. And it's a memory, right? It's 100 years from now when I'm dead and people can look at it and say, hey, it's Jeff and Ricky Starks. I mean, that probably won't happen, but you know what I mean? Like it's a case of years from now.
Yeah, that's a good question.
What's
that's
that?
a good question, actually. How many new pictures do you think you got in our trip then? How many new wrestlers did you tick off the list?
It's a great question. And I should have done the research. I'm almost ashamed of myself that I didn't. I would say easily 75, especially if you count, and we'll talk about it in a second, at WrestleMania. Daniel and I got a package through On Location, and part of that was we got a couple of wrestlers that showed up where we were sitting. So there were probably, I don't know, a dozen or so WWE wrestlers that we met that we normally wouldn't have. Some of them bigger names like Big E, who was in New Day. But then also some, let's say, up-and-comers, like Zoe Stark, who coincidentally was in the corner of Shayna Baszler at Bloodsport. So for me, that was just a really, really cool moment. So super happy about that. So getting into WrestleCon, as we were alluding to just before. So as I said, WrestleCon is almost like Comic-Con, but the wrestling version. You do it once or twice a year, usually around a big event like WrestleMania. It's 3 days, and there's probably, what would you guys say, easily 100, 200 wrestlers there. Each have a table, a merch stand. You can pay for a picture, you can pay for an autograph of them, or you can pay for what they call a combo, which is both. Usually there's a little bit of a discount if you buy the combo, but some guys don't do that. Additionally, something that is new to the convention business, let's say over the last couple of years, is when they're for the premium items. So oftentimes for an autograph, they'll say an autograph is, I'm making this up, $40. But if you want an action figure signed, it's $60. But if you want the action figure signed with inscription, it's $80. So these types of things quickly build up. So I think we went to 3 days of WrestleCon. Is that correct, guys?
Yes, we did.
Sure.
Yeah, I think we did. Steve, do you want to go first and talk through maybe some of your highlights of what we experienced, what we saw, stuff like that?
I mean, I was online most of the time. So when it comes to me and meeting wrestlers, celebrities, whatever you want to call them at these shows, I'll go for people who I'm a fan of or who are like once in a lifetime opportunity. The two big names that I met were Sting and Ronda Rousey. Sting, who just retired, been a fan of, figure I'll never get a chance to meet him again. Let me knock him off the bucket list. And Ronda Rousey, when am I ever going to get the chance to meet her, right? Their lines were incredibly long. So long that I made friends with the people in front of me and back of me to hold my spot, while I was able to go and meet other people throughout waiting in the line to get up to actually meet Ronda Rousey and Sting to get the autographed inscription of whatever I had brought that time. So it is a very long line. You have to be very patient, but you know, if you plan it well, you can meet a lot of people to get a lot of your autographs and photos done.
Yeah.
Absolutely true. And the funny thing was, so the three of us waited in line for the Sting photo, which I just showed on the screen a moment ago, which was awesome, right? Sting is a certified Hall of Famer in wrestling. He was big in WCW. He had a stint in WWE. He spent the last 3 years in AEW, but now I guess he's officially or unofficially retired. So this is part of his retirement tour, but like he's been around forever. He was tag team partners with the Ultimate Warrior like 100 years ago. Really cool to see him, cool to meet him. Got a picture with him. The three of us did. And then another day, we all went to WrestleCon, and Steve is a huge UFC fan, huge Ronda Rousey fan. So he waited in line to get a picture with and get an autograph from Ronda Rousey, which I'll let Steve get into that in a second. But in the amount of time Steve waited in line to meet Ronda Rousey, I think Daniel and I, what did we get? Like 3 dozen different wrestlers? Like I think we spent like entire day. I might have taken a couple of naps. I'm not even sure.
Yeah, it was quite a long line. But, you know, to be fair, I was able to hop out. I got to meet a couple guys, the Acclaimed, Enzo Amore, what's his name, Walk with Elias.
Yes.
So a couple guys went off, you know, here and there. But I wasn't trying to venture too far because, you know, I'm like Jeff. I've also gone to WrestleCons and independent shows, and I've met certain people, and I don't need to meet them again. Plus, I don't need to meet everybody there. I'm very selective with who I meet. So I was able to get my autographs and photos in while still going back to the line to check in, like, oh, okay, we've moved up further. Great.
Yeah, to Steve's point, this was my first WrestleCon in like, I'd say 10 years. Like I went to it in New Orleans in 2014, I guess it was. So it legitimately was 10 years. So for me, I've gone to some wrestling conventions and smaller shows, but there were a number of wrestlers that were, let's say, accessible now that 10 years ago weren't. So a lot of what I like is like the big names that I'm a fan of, some of the smaller up and coming guys to try to get pictures with them before they become a huge name. And just, you know, some of the wrestlers that are either in the GCW show, whatever else like that. And more recently, the last couple of years, I've started collecting autographed action figures. So for me, that was kind of a big thing. So long story short, I'd say one of the days I brought this huge crate of action figures. Would I ever do that again? I'm not sure. Maybe next time I would pay to ship it and like have it do it behind closed doors and send it back to me. Would be a little pricier, but kind of is what it is. But for me, it was my first experience doing this, and I was like, whatever. So real quick, just to show a couple of things that I ended up picking up. So some of the smaller wrestlers, or let's say some of the non-WWE wrestlers, are starting to get action figures now. So this was one that really I thought was cool, and I was like, I need to get this signed. So here's a picture of one that I got signed, dual signed by Matt Cardona and Nick Gage. Matt Cardona, some people might know as Zack Ryder from the WWE years ago. That was an awesome one that like I bought it back in December with the intention of trying to get it signed. A few others that I got. So since we saw Shayna Baszler wrestle or fight at Bloodsport, I thought this was a really cool keepsake to remember the event by. So I got this, which I thought was really, really awesome. I didn't get it personally signed, but High Spots had a bunch of them pre-signed, so I did that. Lastly, a couple other real quick figures that I got signed. In AEW, there's the Acclaimed with Billy Gunn. Thought this was a really cool, like triple signed, excuse me, action figure box. The Gobbledygooker, I mean, he's one of the biggest, what they refer to as wrestlers of all time. This is just like a funny thing to have. Like they finally released a figure, and I was like, if Hector Guerrero ever does a signing, I'm absolutely getting it signed. And surprisingly or unsurprisingly, I was not the only person who was in line getting this signed. But for me, I thought it was a really cool thing because you've got the original Gobbledygooker who signed it, Big Papa Pump, Scott Steiner. everybody's favorite, especially when it comes to Steiner math. For those of you that get it. And then lastly, Doink the Clown. I mean, I've always been into gimmick wrestlers, and what's cooler than a clown that wrestles? So for me, this was a really cool one, a really cool piece that I picked up that I got signed at WrestleCon. Additionally, like I said before, I probably got, 50 or 75 different wrestlers' pictures with them, as that's a big piece of my collection. We all collect different things for different reasons, but for me, that was a really cool thing from it. Daniel, are there any specific wrestlers or interactions or whatever that you really enjoyed from WrestleCon that you want to talk about?
Yeah, there's a few wrestlers, but also for me that was my first WrestleCon. I'm a big sportsman, really a collector, so I go to a lot of the national and the big sports memorabilia shows, but obviously wrestling's part of. This was the first time I've actually been to a true, purely 100% wrestling. So for me, it was like a child back in the sweet shop again. And my experience with WrestleCon actually started the minute I picked Jeff up from his house to drive there, when I seen the empty crates that he had. My one little crate that I had, I was like, I've totally messed this one up. And Jeff filled both of those completely. So if you ever want guidance from anyone on how to approach these shows, Jeff's your man. He had it all down to a T, super organized, helped guide me through it as well. Awesome experience. There's so many great people I got to meet. Couple that stick out. Jordan Grace is fantastic. So she's the current TNA world champion. Just a chance to meet her. She was so much fun. She spent time to chat with you. She was just a great person as well. She wasn't just there signing and moving you along. She was an awesome one. Getting a chance to meet the Acclaimed was fantastic as well. Really, really enjoyed that. And then one for me was Swoggle. I'd never met Swoggle in person before. So to get the chance, some of you guys might know him as Hornswoggle. He was around WWE for a long time. Chance to meet him in person was fantastic as well. But there was so many, like literally you just went floor to floor, and it's like, oh, I remember him from my childhood. Here's someone up and coming. Just an awesome opportunity to see people that you would never normally get a chance to engage with. So fantastic experience.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And again, I've been to a couple. Steve, I think you went to the one in Jersey and New Orleans. Was that right? Back in 2013 and 14?
Yeah, that's correct. And just, picking up where Dan left off, like the WrestleCon convention, you can meet anyone from any time, any period. Like, I know he wasn't there, but like I met, Minoru Suzuki at GCW to Enzo Amore from ex-WWE Talent. Two different guys on the spectrum of wrestling, right? Like two of my personal favorites. So, if you like any wrestler, there's a good chance they're probably going to be there if they're accessible, as long as they're not under WWE contract at the given time.
Which is awesome. I mean, if you want the experience, you want to meet wrestlers or whatever, like I'd say definitely go and do it. The ticket to get in isn't that expensive. It's fairly cheap, I would say. It definitely adds up quickly depending upon how many wrestlers, how much talent you want to see. Sure. Some of them are 10, 20, $30. Some of them, like a Sting or a Ronda Rousey, could be, a lot pricier. So I would say, definitely do the research before you go, but, definitely budget for whatever you're looking to do. Got a little time left here, so I wanted to talk about one of what I consider one of the most ridiculous moments of the weekend. So Daniel and I went to both nights of WrestleMania. So WrestleMania was Saturday night and Sunday night, and we went to it. It was over where the Philadelphia Eagles play in the football stadium. WrestleMania started, I believe, at like 7 o'clock. And part of the ticket package we had for GCW and the Collective was a show called, let's call it the Cluster F, which starts at 11:59 p.m.
Oh, yeah.
And so Daniel and I was super happy we were aligned on this one. While we were there for WrestleMania and while we paid a ridiculous amount of money for WrestleMania tickets, we were even more excited for this Cluster F show, which was part of the GCW. So weirdly, and I can almost guarantee everybody rolled their eyes at us, we left. So the main event for Saturday night at WrestleMania was, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, it was Roman Reigns and The Rock against Seth Rollins and Cody Rhodes. Was that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So Daniel and I aligned that as soon as the introductions for the main event were done, we were going to hightail out of the stadium, go find an Uber, and get back to the Collective, get back to the Cluster F show. Just to kind of throw it out there, Daniel and I were sitting in a suite as part of the package that we had. These people around us were like, you sat through all of WrestleMania. The main event's about to start, and you guys are leaving for what? And we're like, oh, for the Cluster F. They're like, what? I don't even want to know. And then the funny thing was, we had the same seats, the same suite for the second night on Sunday. So not only did we leave before the main event started, we had to sit around and talk to the same people the very next day as well, which I'm sure, in their minds are thinking, who are these two clowns? And I mean, we did get some questions. We had some great conversation. They're kind of like, what do you mean? Like a small indie show that holds 1,000 people is going to be better than 80,000 people watching, Cody Rhodes and The Rock or whatever. We're like, yeah, absolutely. Again, agree to disagree. It is what it is. So the two of us hightail out of there. We took an Uber across town once we finally found an Uber, which is tougher than it sounds outside the football stadium there. Because the Uber lot is actually not even an Uber lot anymore, but the signage still says it, weirdly. I don't know. So we make it across town. We find Steve. We get inside. And just real quick story on this. So the Cluster F is basically exactly as the name of the show sounds. It is a bit of a cluster. So there were only 2 matches on this show. It was scheduled to be like a 3+ hour show, and there were 2 matches. The first match was called the Punjabi Prison Match, which is basically they have the ring set up, and then around the ring, they have like bamboo and all sorts of other stuff, almost creating like a steel cage. If you've ever seen like an old school wrestling steel cage match. Now, that in itself is fine, right? It's a very basic thing. Now, the challenge was we've had the same seats for the entire week at these sets of shows. We get there, and there were legitimately tables and all sorts of stuff built on top of our seats, right? So we get there, and we have nowhere to sit. I find a security or production guy, and I'm like, hey, so those are our seats. What do you suggest we do? He's like, oh, why don't you just go stand in the back and just, enjoy the show? I'm like, no. This is another one. This is almost comparable to like our Hilton story when we checked in, where I'm like, look, I don't want to escalate the situation, but we paid good money to sit first row, not stand 5th row back by the bar. This is not going to work for us.
I want to talk to your manager.
So I think the first, let's say 15 or 20 minutes, this conversation went absolutely nowhere. He's like, go talk to so-and-so. So I go to the back. I don't know if I found Brett Lauderdale, who's the owner of GCW, or the production guy. But I found somebody who then went to the front and was like, okay, so what's the situation? I'm like, you see these seats? He's like, yeah, you can't sit there. I'm like, exactly, but those are our seats. What do we do? Like, how do you kind of compensate us for it? Like, do you give us merch? Do you move this thing around? Whatever else like that. So again, this went on for, I'd say, a good 25 minutes, right? At this point, they're almost ready to go live with the show. And this is on like live stream. So it's basically a case of like legitimately, it's going to start showing on TV soon, kind of is what it is. They went to the back and found this guy they refer to as Big Vin. Big Vin is the most amazing guy you've ever met. So for anybody who knows ECW wrestling from years ago, there was a wrestler named 911. 911 was great, big guy, go to the ring, he would choke slam people, whatever else like that. Well, 911's son is named Big Vin. Big Vin wrestles occasionally, but for the most part, he's kind of like the jack of all trades for GCW wrestling. They need to build something, Big Vin takes care of it. So Big Vin comes over, we explain the situation, he goes, okay, here's what we're going to do. And this is almost like as they're going live on the air. He says, okay, everybody, break down the tables and chairs, get this out of the way so these guys can sit here. So as they're breaking it down, they're about to go on the air. He looks at us, he goes, okay, here's what's going to happen. About 5 minutes into the match, someone's going to go to the top rope. Someone's going to come, right before he flies down, I'm going to look at you guys and say, move now. When I say move now, you guys move. Don't move before then. When I move now, you move. And we're like, this is like some inside baseball nonsense. Like, this is just ridiculous. Like, I like knowing what's happening. Like, I've watched Beyond the Mat. I've watched other wrestling documentaries. But for me, like, this blew me away that, like, we're just 3 civilian wrestling fans. And again, I respect what he's doing. He's helping us out. But he's basically telling us what's going to happen in the match, which is just mind-blowing, right? He says, move. You guys leave. The thing happens. Someone's going to fall. We're going to move him. We're going to break it down. Back to your seat 2 minutes later, and all is good. You'll be happy. We're like, okay, great. So as they're going on the air, they break down the table. They start introducing wrestlers. We're sitting in our seats. All this is going down. All of a sudden, someone goes to the top rope, top of the cage. Big Vin, like he said he would, looks at us and goes, move, right? The 3 of us hightail out of there. We just get out. We move. Legitimately, within a minute and a half, like something ridiculous happens. Just for anybody who's watching this on Spotify or on YouTube, let me just show you what actually happened. And to be fair, this was an amazing video that I didn't realize I was capturing history at the time. This I put up on TikTok, if you want to find it on TikTok, at Seltzer777. And to date has over 2.5 million views, which blows me away, right? Like, there's no reason why this like 14-second clip should ever get that many views. And this also introduced me to all internet trolls, people saying, hey, these guys did it for a hot dog and a handshake. Whatever the comments are, it doesn't matter, right? Just watch this video, and this is legitimately why they made us move. And I get it, but like, it's just strange. Just watch this. Like, I've probably watched this, I want to say no less than 300 times since April. And like that guy's not moving, right? Like after the show, his tag team partner was doing meet and greets. This guy probably went to the hospital, right? It was a ridiculous fall. I mean, it was definitely a spectacle. And like clockwork, as soon as this happened, they rolled him over. They broke everything down. They said, okay, guys, sit down. And we sat down and the show went on, which again, wrestling is a weird thing where somebody could, I mean, like Owen Hart years ago, somebody could die during a wrestling show and they say, okay, what's the next match? Which, is a very weird situation, especially for non-wrestling fans who don't get it, right? Like in football, for example, a year or two ago, there was a Buffalo Bills guy who was paralyzed during a game. Like it was the first quarter early in the game. They never finished the game, right? It was early in the game. So you've got people watching at home, people watching in the crowd. They legitimately said, okay, this man's health is more important. Let's just cancel the game and move on. Like in wrestling, they basically just like move the guy's body over and say, okay, let's continue, which, I mean, you can obviously have a different perspective or opinion on it. It's weird, but kind of is what it is at this point. So this happened. We went back to our seat, watched the rest of the match. Match was great. Followed by the second match, which was what they refer to as the Cluster F Battle Royal, which I think had no less than 97 different wrestlers, like legitimately 97 wrestlers. Like I'm not saying like they had wrestlers, they would leave, come back in a mask. Now I'm wrestler number 2, come back in, a different hockey jersey and wrestler number 3, like I've seen in some independent shows. Like this was legitimately like I don't want to say every, but a lot of different wrestlers that were in town that probably weren't booked at, let's say 3 a.m. on Saturday night were just brought in to do like a run-in. It was
I was going to say, insane. Jeff, worth saying that this starts at 2 a.m. in the morning. It was going on until some ridiculous time.
Yeah. And I mean, that also talks about the fact that like, seeing 13 wrestling shows over the course of 5 days, the timing was weird. Daniel, I know, is a bit of a night owl. I need my 8 hours sleep, or I'm a nightmare usually. But this week we're legitimately seeing shows, I think at least 3 nights that started at midnight, went to like 2:30 or 3 a.m. Walk back to our hotel, wake up, go to an 11 a.m. show and do it all over again. It was insane. Steve, do you have any thoughts on the Cluster F and what we saw?
I was going to say, circling back to that video you just showed, like, anyone who wasn't there can see that, like, oh, okay, and shrug it off. But, like, I'm a deathmatch wrestling fan. I look forward to seeing stuff like that. I got to see that in person, literally 2 to 3 feet in front of me, right? I remember looking over at Dan and saying, I'm uncomfortable. Like No, dude, seriously. It felt like seeing somebody go through a car wreck right in front of you. I was like, oh, wow, maybe it's not as cool as it is in person. And, like, that's the type of stuff I look forward to when it comes to deathmatch wrestling. The glass, the light tubes, the fire, the blood. I love that stuff. And that dude falling from there to go through the tables and the chairs, sure, it was an awesome moment. Like, oh, wow, it's different when it happens in front of you, though.
Absolutely. All of a sudden, it feels real, right? It feels human, right? You're thinking to yourself, man, this guy has bones and nerves that are probably not working the way they're supposed to right now. It's just, it feels more real, right? It all of a sudden becomes less, let's say, fantasy and less like a movie. And you're like, this guy might have a family. Like, what is going on here, right? Yeah. So it was a crazy show. Like, I do look forward to going to see this kind of show again at some point. But again, maybe once a year, once every 2 years, live in person is probably the way to go for this specific show. I'd imagine for his own personal health as well,
Yeah, there was so many highlights, Jeff. Like, I still remember, I'll never forget us at 2:30 in the morning singing Teenage Dirtbag twice back to back.
That song is still stuck in my head, guys. I still play it.
Guys, don't sing it. I do not have the musical rights to it. I don't want to get sued by YouTube or by Wheatus or anybody else like that. So we've said enough. Let's move on about Teenage Dirtbag. Awesome. So we did a lot that week. It was insane. Like I said, 13 shows plus, including the Independent Wrestling Hall of Fame, WrestleCon. I do have 2 funny stories that I'd like to share. But before I get into them, Steve, Daniel, anything else that you want to share or bring up that maybe we haven't talked about yet?
First, Steve.
The naked guy in the Battle Royal.
That's right. So
how random was that?
So for those that aren't aware, back in, let's say, 2004, in IWS, which is a Montreal Canadian professional wrestling company, there's a wrestler called Sexy Eddie. I'm not going to get too much into his gimmick because I'd like to, not get canceled or whatever else like that. But let's say he comes out to the ring in very, very small shorts, let's say. And at some point during the wrestling match, his attire goes flying. He's covering himself up with his hands. And Steve was looking at me like, what is going on? Like, what are we seeing here? Like, for me, I'm familiar with Sexy Eddie. I saw him in CZW and IWS wrestling years ago. This was new to Steve. Like, I can remember legitimately 2 years ago, I referenced Sexy Eddie. This but was a little before Steve's time, so we had no idea what I was talking about. So as happy as I was that Steve finally got to experience the true excitement that is Sexy Eddie, I'm not sure that Steve was really ready for it in person.
I was also uncomfortable.
That's hilarious. Yeah, only thing I would add is if anyone is a independent wrestling fan out there and hasn't seen the cluster, it's definitely one to try and find either online or on Triller. Worth a watch. It's a fantastic show. I think we need to give a shout out to our MVP though, Mike Bailey. So Jeff mentioned earlier on that we went to maybe 13 wrestling shows. There's a independent wrestler who's now kind of went pro a little bit with TNA as well, Mike Bailey, who must have wrestled 25 shows that week. He was at every single show we were at. And then when you spoke to him afterwards, he was doing double. So that's just kind of gives you a feel for what these sorts of weeks are like. You've got not only fans going at everything, but you've got all these independent wrestlers really taking an opportunity to hit as many different shows as possible.
Yeah, what was crazy about that too, I'd say, is there was one night. So when Daniel and I went to the DDT Pro Japanese Wrestling show, Steve was at a different show across town at the ECW Arena. So I don't remember who went first, but Mike Bailey was on both shows that took place at exactly the same time. So either he opened our show and closed Steve's, or vice versa. Which for me, I'm looking at it, I'm like, how does one even do that? Because with traffic and stuff like that, like there's a lot of unknowns you have to deal with. But it just shows like the amount of matches he had that week, and he never phoned it in. Like every match was like a match of the night candidate on like every show he was on. Like I think that's just, I mean, kudos to everything he does. Like I'm a huge fan of his. I'm a bigger fan of his now after experiencing it. Like he went everywhere from that outdoor tent rainy show with us on Wednesday. We probably saw him, at least 5 or 6 times over the next couple of days. It was just amazing. And again, he didn't get injured. And he's not even like an old school, like I'll stand up here, take 2 shots and go down. He's a high flyer. He's taking shots. Like he's flying, he's doing flips. He's doing all sorts of ridiculous stuff. So the fact that he's able to go through all of that was just insane to me.
He took on Rob Van Dam at the WrestleCon show at ECW Arena, and the one great moment I remember, I looking up at him during Rob Van Dam's entrance, and you see Bailey heading out just singing along with Pantera, like he's getting into it too, right before their match. So it was a really fun time.
Yeah, he loves what he does, and I'm sure. I mean, just being perfectly honest, the amount of money these guys can make in this week is probably more than other wrestlers can make in 6 months, right? Like between signings at conventions and in terms of like doing so many shows and matches, like they're paid a decent amount at a match, or at the very least doing it 6 or 8 times in a week. Normally to wrestle 8 different times would take him probably about a month and a half to do. And as great as Mike Bailey is, he doesn't charge that much either. Like some wrestlers for pictures will charge 20, 30, 40, 50 bucks. I think Bailey was $10 each time, which just blows me away. Like he deserves so much more. And I'm hopeful that like he gets bigger and bigger, as we get, later in his career.
This is also kind of random, but shout out to Paul Walterhauser, like who's an actor who was also wrestling at the ECW show, and he's walking right by us at the Collective, and we stop him for a quick photo. Super nice guy, but like you don't expect to see any actors from any Netflix shows walking by you at a wrestling event.
Absolutely. Last thing I wanted to add before I have a really quick story is shout out to Daniel, actually, who gave me the greatest idea in terms of what would be the ultimate souvenir for the week. So, we went to so many shows, met so many wrestlers, and over the years, I have so many 8x10s signed by wrestlers, which are cool. I guess they're fine. But I end up putting them away, putting them into like my, into a cabinet or whatever. I never really got to use them. So what Daniel gave me the idea was, since we had credentials for our shows, why not get them to sign that? So here's what I did. And again, shout out to Daniel. This is completely his idea. What I would do is I would get a combo with all the wrestlers at the GCW shows. I'd get a picture with them and get them to sign my credentials. So this is something that I can kind of hang up. I can show. And it's just a really cool keepsake of all the wrestler stuff in one place. So I did it for the Collective and then also for WrestleMania. They gave us one as well. So I had all the wrestlers that Daniel and I met at WrestleMania sign this credential as well. Now, to be fair, in the front it shows The Rock, Cody, Roman, and Seth. They didn't sign it. But like I've got Big E's autograph. I've got Omos's autograph. I've got Zoe Stark. Basically, all the WWE wrestlers that I ran into or could see, I got them to sign this as well, which again, like I said, I can't say enough great things to Daniel about this. Like this was something I never even thought about, but we had a couple of paint pens with us. So I was like, why not give it a shot? This is really cool. I have it hanging up. I'll probably at some point shadow box it and hang it up more formally. But for me, like this is just cool. Like this is kind of the culmination of the week for me,
Yeah, and Jeff, that's a great picture of the match that we left to go to the cluster.
Yes. Well said, Daniel. Appreciate that. Absolutely got that spot on. So with that said, I do have one last story before we kind of cut out for the week. So I, like most people, have an Uber account, right? We take Ubers all over town. We
Oh,
drive,
boy.
whatever else like that. I opened my Uber account maybe 8 years ago in Orlando, so I can go from Disney World to Universal, stuff like that, right? And unlike most people, like I had a 5.0, right? Like for me, I'm super respectful. The car gets there, I sit down, I smile, I don't talk unless talked to, I don't drink, I just stare into space. If the guy has a conversation, I will talk to him, whatever else like that. The one thing I told both Daniel and Steve before this trip began was, guys, I have a 5.0 on Uber. Do not mess this up. They're like, oh, no, we're cool. Everything's going to be great. Don't worry about it. I wouldn't do anything like that to you, Jeff. It's not a problem. So as you guys know, on Uber, you don't necessarily know the rating that a driver gives you immediately, but eventually it aggregates it and you can see what your score is. Long story short, the week after WrestleMania, and I hadn't used Uber at all after the week in Philly. We probably took 6 or 7 rides in my account. I look in Uber. I now have a 4.97 Uber rating. Guys, come on. What was the one thing that I told you? I said, I hold this strong. Daniel was talking about a coworker who, messes things up or whatever. And I was like, okay, Daniel, that's great. Don't be that coworker. And here we are. The amount of rides I'm going to have to take over the next 10 years just to get a 4.99 is absurd. Like, I might have to open up a second account and start again. Like, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but here we are today.
I just want to let you know that your points went down that week, but my points went up with
Yeah,
the
you're
3
welcome
rides
for
that
that.
I got.
Yes, you're welcome for that, because the rare occurrence when Steve was calling the Uber, as I said, I sit there, I stare into space, I smile, I talk when talked to, I am completely silent. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've thought back and said, what might have knocked us down from the 5? I don't know. Like, nothing really came. I mean, to be honest and fair, like, I don't know that we did anything inappropriate or ridiculous. I mean, maybe some drivers just by default give a 4 because, it's like when you get a survey, you say, oh, how great was the service? Like, service could always be better, so it's a 4 out of 5 or something like that. Maybe that was the case. Maybe we got a driver on a bad day. I don't know. I mean, we were always there. We were all good. So, I mean, as I joke about it, I don't think Steve or Daniel did anything inappropriate. It's just one of those things that's like, I always had as a badge of honor my 5.0, which now mathematically is basically impossible ever to re-achieve again.
Jeff, do you need Steve and I on the record to apologize? Is that what you're looking for? Because
I mean, if I ask for an apology, it's going to be insincere. I mean, you're welcome to if you like, but I'm joking. It's all good. It's fine. And, it is what it is. Life goes on. Cool. With that said, guys, I appreciate you guys spending time with me in the pod this week. Any last things you want to say? Anything you want to promote or share? Anything you want to talk about?
I was going to say one question we haven't broached on Philly is Geno's or Pat's. What did we settle on in the end?
I don't know. I remember there was one night, and I wasn't even drunk. Like, I was completely sober. And for whatever reason, I was laughing hysterically. I think it was because it was 3 a.m, and I was exhausted, and everything was funny to me. And I think we went out after a show, went to whichever one it was. I don't remember which one it was. It was amazing, by the way. Got it. I was exhausted. And then I think we took an Uber back to another wrestling show that night afterwards and whatever else like that. So I don't know that I have an Yes, it was for the culture, which is another one of the amazing wrestling shows we saw that week. So I don't know that I have an opinion. I just have strong memories of everything was funny to me. Like, almost like I was super drunk, but I was just so tired at that point that, like, everything was just funny to me.
I agree.
Cool. Daniel, Steve, anything you want to last remarks or anything you want to promote or support, or are you guys good?
I mean, I had such a great time with you guys. Like, I look back on this memory very fondly. A lot of good photos, a lot of good, inside jokes between us. So if this ever has the opportunity to come up again, up and down the East Coast, you guys can count me in for this. And anyone who's on the fence about doing it, let one of your buddies know you want to go and just make the week out of it.
Appreciate it.
Same. And Jeff, massive thank you for organizing. It was a fantastic time. And you did a lot of legwork, so we appreciate it.
Thank you for saying that. Again, for me, it was a bucket list, going to that many shows in 1 week. And I know it's something that, very few people will do, right? Both from an interest level, a time level, and a money level, right? This wasn't a cheap week. I fully comprehend that. And it's one of those things that I look at it, I'm like, neither my wife nor my kids would have any interest in doing. So I looked at it and I was like, okay, how do I make this happen? I mean, to be honest, I probably would have done this by myself. I've done shows like this by myself before. But I was even happier that you guys got to join me. So again, thank you so much for joining me. This was amazing. This was a bucket list for me, and sharing it with you two guys was just amazing. So thank you for that. Cool. With that said, guys, wanted to thank everybody for listening as always. Once again, we've gotten some great feedback. Keep the feedback coming. My DMs are open if you want to share anything. We do have a lot of fun guests coming up in the coming weeks. To stay up to date, you can continue to follow us on Instagram, obviously, at Everybody Has a Story Pod. As mentioned before, we're on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, iHeartRadio, Amazon, Castbox, Good Pods. If there's a podcast place that you want us to be on that we're not on, shoot me a note. Let's see what we can do. DMs are open. If you want to be a guest, let me know. I'd love to chat. Outside of that, have an amazing time, guys, and I'll see you all next week. Take care. Bye.